Have you ever tried sharing your brand story only to feel like you're just talking about yourself too much? No, you're not alone. You see, most coaches struggle with this exact problem. How do you tell your story in a way that connects with your audience rather than coming across as self centered? Well, today we're breaking down a simple framework that transforms your story from being about you to being about your audience. Because when done right, your brand story becomes the most powerful tool for building trust and attracting your ideal clients. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Coaching with Content podcast. My name is Darren. Good to see you here. I am with my good friend, Mr. Dustin Pead. How are you today?
I'm doing good, man. I'm glad to be here, ready to talk some coaching with content.
That's right, coaching with content. And today we are talking about the lovely brand story video, or what we like to say, the BSV.
That's right.
Insider language. If you want to be hip and cool, you call it the BSV, right? We've also seen out there in the world these videos, this brand story video be called a bunch of different things. About us video. I've even seen a video business card, anything like that that kind of tells who you are, what you do, and why you do it. And this is an important element to coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, any business out there. Having a brand story video is really helpful because it brings people in a little bit. It brings them into who you are, how you think, right? Like a little bit of that kind of, oh, this is the direction or the why behind the what that they do. And that's why brand story videos are so powerful. But the problem that we see often is that there are a lot of me, right? There are a lot of, how awesome am I? And these are the clients that I've worked with. And this is the thing that I think. And so if you're watching a video like that, it's easy to just be like, okay, I don't really care, and shut it off. And so though brand story videos are powerful, we often see a lot of mistakes that happen in them. But Dustin, from your perspective and where you're at, I know we're working on a brand story video for you right now. We've done a ton in 1898, and you've kind of helped us oversee some of those projects. Why do you feel that the brand story video is so important?
I mean, we've talked about being able to convey who you are in a succinct and compelling way with your content.
Mm-hmm.
This would be the all encompassing, if you only had one video, this would be the video I would say to have, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because most of our brand story videos, I'm sure we're going to get into this, are going to include a little bit of like your perspective, what makes you unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to include maybe possibly a little bit of backstory as to how you got there. And we know that story is king
Yep.
when it comes to video or any kind of business, right? And then it's also more than likely going to include some type of a testimonial of a customer or a client.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of get all of that in a 5-minute package. I mean,
Yep.
we usually say what, 3 to 6 minutes is what we say for a brand story video.
For sure. Especially if you add those, they can be a little longer when you add in those testimonial pieces, sure. Right? If you don't have those included, yeah, the sweet spot is in that 3:30, if you will. 3-4 minutes maybe at the most, kind of thing. And then, yeah, if you're adding those testimonials, yep, it can get a little longer because those are a little more engaging as you go, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like how you said that. That's kind of, if there was one video that you needed to make, this would kind of be the one that kind of gives that overview. Right. And I like to say that these videos typically include who you are, what you do, and then why you do it. And I think that's the important aspect of it, because when you talk about the why, it's like that Simon Sinek start with why, right? If I understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you kind of invite me into that story a little bit about, like, we're in this journey together to, go forth in this way, right? This is the vision that you have, and you invited me into that, and you break down that why. That's some really, really cool places to be and invite people into. And so as we're looking at this, let's start here, Dustin. I want to talk us through some common mistakes that we see in brand story videos that if you have these we'll go over these 4 common mistakes that come up in brand story videos. The first one is going to be you start with your credentials instead of what we might say connection. Credentials instead of connection. And what we mean by that is when you start to just talk about all the things that you've done, how awesome you are, how
Mm.
cool you are. I think we've all seen videos like that, right? Where we we push play and it's just like, man, this guy just likes himself, you know. It's like, bro, just like, okay. And it you know, I'm a fan of Don Miller and the story brand framework, and he talks about, you know, being the guide and not the hero, right? And usually that's this part here. When you
Yep.
start talking about how cool you are and all those things, it's like it makes you the hero of the story. And we typically hear things like, well, back in 1992, my grandfather decided to start a company, and this is what, and it's just like, it's all the things that potential clients don't really care about, right?
Mhm.
Potential clients are always coming to you, a website or a video of yours to say, I have a problem. Can you help me solve it? And when you lead with credentials instead of some type of connection to make sure that you say to them, I understand who you are and what you're doing, that's a big mistake that we see, right? How does that sit with you, Dustin?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's the reason you have the testimonials is it's the hero's journey of the guide. If I could get a little kind of cross pollinated there,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
it's like the testimonial pieces are a way for you to share the impact without you having to be the one to be like, look at all the great stuff
yeah,
I've done.
yeah,
Because it's really more like you said. We've talked about this before. I can't remember if we've talked about it on podcast or not. So forgive me if we haven't gotten there yet. But when we think about coaching with content, like even in that BSV, even in that brand story video,
yeah.
there should be some coaching in it, right?
That's
Because
good.
for example, you're going to do one about me. I'm going to talk about how creatives live on little to no margin and how that's affecting their bottom line and their scalability.
Yeah,
And then I'm going to talk about time margin, and I'm going to introduce probably the whole do versus do thing because it's kind of like a cornerstone framework of mine.
right.
And even in that, I'm adding value. I'm guiding. I'm not trying to be heroic by centering myself at it. I'm going, you can be the hero by implementing this framework.
Correct. Correct. That's the key, right? That's the key is in teaching kind of your perspective and who you are and why you do it. It's coming along and coaching with the content or being that guide to the hero of the story, which is your potential client. And so, yeah, when you lead with credentials or you lead with that, like who you are and how awesome you are, you can easily lose
Mm-hmm.
people. And so
Yep.
that's one of the biggest mistakes that we see. The second mistake that we see is what I'll say, sharing all the details of your story, you know, oversharing. Like you're typically what we have is a little bit of a curse of knowledge, right? We've lived our experience, so we want to make sure that they understand the full thing instead of kind of giving those highlights, right? Those two or three things that are going to help in the story. But what we typically do is we go all the way back. I made the joke about, you know, in 1992 this company was started, or, you know, back when this, and I got fired from my job, made me go out and start this company. Like there are certain aspects of that story that are helpful, but often what we do is we want to make sure that they understand the full nuance. So we overshare.
Right. Right. Right.
And it just, again, it kind of becomes that much, you know, if you're sharing too many credentials, it's the same idea. You're sharing too much of your story, people get lost in it, right? And they're like trying to track and follow and see what you're doing. And that can often lead to confusion. And when you lead to confusion, people are just going to kind of disengage in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
And so that second mistake being oversharing the details of your story.
Mm-hmm.
Dustin, have you seen or heard or, you know, experienced anything like that where you're just like, bro, calm it
Yeah.
down?
I actually have a practical tip here for you.
Nice.
I was just recording earlier today. I was recording another podcast that I do for another business that I co-own with a couple of partners called the Culture Base. And on that, we were talking about storytelling and how it carries through your values of your company, right?
Mhm.
And my business partner Blake was telling this story about how he was just recently in Chicago with this like conference group or whatever, and they sat down with the team at Second City. If you don't know what
Mhm.
Second City is, it's a famous improv group in Chicago. Steve Carell, Chris Farley, Tina Fey, like all these people have gone through Second City. And so Second City sat down with them and and led them through this storytelling exercise. And they said, "Hey, I want you to share a story. They partner people up. I want you to share a story. I want you to share a story with somebody or with the person, your partner, about a recent success or win in your life or your business or whatever. And I want you to say it. I want you to tell it to them in 60 seconds."
Mm.
And they were, telling them, "Hey, you're 15 seconds in, 30 seconds in, 15 seconds to go, 10, counting them down, right? Putting the pressure on." And Blake's like, "Man, I thought I was a decent storyteller, but 30 seconds in, I hadn't really even gotten to the story yet." So he's like rushing through it to get to the end. He's like, "Okay, now your partner is going to repeat that story back to you in 30 seconds."
Mm.
And then that was their challenge. And they went through it and they counted them down or whatever. It's like, okay, and you are going to repeat what you heard back from like what you just heard from your
Yeah.
partner. You're going to
Yeah.
repeat that back to him in 10 seconds. And so the idea of the exercise
Wow.
was that it taught them how to be more concise and
Yep.
get to the point quicker in their story by cutting out all the fluff and just focusing on what matters. But I thought it was a great tip to be able to kind of refine your message and get to the point,
Yeah.
get to the meat of what, and kind of remove as much fluff as possible because you don't realize.
Yeah.
I mean, what I love, just one thing, what I love about this exercise in the first interaction from you to your partner, the 60-second version to them telling you the 30-second version back, you get immediate feedback on 30 seconds of that story that didn't matter.
For sure.
It's immediate.
Yeah.
And then you hear that and you go, "Oh, I can cut 20 out of that
Yeah.
and I'll give you 10 back."
Yeah.
And now you've gotten what took you 6 times as long to
Yep.
tell.
Yep.
Six
Yep.
times. That's craziness.
Yeah, and what that says to me, Dustin, I was thinking of this, is that we often don't practice or think about how to share our story well.
Mhm.
We go, "Oh, I know my story," right? Like if somebody said,
Yeah.
"Hey, what tell me that story." You're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, I'll just start doing it."
But it's
And
practice.
we don't practice it. We don't think about what you just outlined, where it's like, what is all the crap that is not needed in there?
Right.
And I've even been doing that, like with voice memos that I send to you or other team members, right? Where it's like I just get long winded just talking about a bunch of stuff. I keep telling myself, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point, right? Like I'm trying to edit it. Now I'm going to start to do that with the 60-second thing all across
Yeah.
the board. But that just, it shines a big light on the fact that often we don't think about how to tell our story or even stories well.
Mhm.
And so that becomes a big mistake that we have in our brand story videos, is because we overshare our own story in some way, shape, or form. That's really good. So yeah, the first mistake that we commonly see is sharing too many credentials. The second one is sharing every detail of our story in some way, shape, or form. The third mistake is that we see forgetting to connect your story to your audience's challenges,
Mm.
right? And so when we don't take our story and kind of reverse that into, again, it takes us out of the hero seat and puts us in the guide seat, if you will, if we're going to take that story arc from the story brand framework. But what will happen often is we just begin to forget to go, how does our story connect with the challenge that the audience is facing at this point? And how does my story enhance that reality instead of take away or just talk about how awesome we are?
Yeah.
We see that done. If you ever watch a brand story and you're engaged and you're captivated and you go, wow, that was really cool, it's because whoever put that together sat and thought, how can I take this part of my story and engage it with my audience in some way, shape, or form? And
Yeah.
when that is done well, it really does hit. really, really well.
Yeah, you always got to remember your client's struggle because you're trying to
Mhm.
come in and guide them through it so that they can be the
Yeah.
hero of their own struggle story,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
Um, there's a speaker that I've gleaned a lot of wisdom from over the years, and he talks about, um, or in his messages or in his talks a lot, he will often say, "Hey, what do we all know?" And that's a way for, hey, what do we all know? We all know that video is great and that video is effective, right? So it's like that whole kind of like, let's get on the same page so that we're at the same starting point and
Yeah.
so that we can relate to one another. And if we can
Yeah.
all agree on A, B, and C, then we can get to X, Y, and Z together. Right.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that's what a good guide does. A good
Mhm.
guide says, hey, you ever notice how like videos are just popping off right now? Or you ever notice how like
Yeah.
reels are more effective sometimes than,
Yeah.
than just carousels. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You ever know,
Yeah.
and then you kind of get in that and they go,
Yep.
oh, you're right. And then now, okay, now you're on the same page and you can guide them through. And that's
Yep.
just good. That's just good coaching,
Yeah.
even more so with content.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of when you bring up the problem, you bring up the issue or something that your audience member will be facing, and then you tie that into the story of
Yeah.
your experience,
Yeah.
right? So here's the problem. Well, I experienced that when I did this, and
Hmm.
this is how I overcame it. Now all of a sudden your story brings them along and into that because you started with the problem, which we'll probably talk about in the framework breakdown here in just a little bit.
Hmm.
But man, that's really really good, really really good. So the fourth common mistake that we see is ending without a clear so what for the listener. Like so what? Like you got to say what does this mean to them, and then like almost call them into action, right? So if we're going with that little piece that we talk about there, where you present the problem, you tell the story. So what does that mean for them now? Well, that means that they need to either take this action, right? They need to create their own video, or they need to take this framework and put it into place. Like, what does it mean for them, and to move them into action in some way, shape, or form, right? Because we've all been there where we've experienced maybe a brand story video or something out there, and we go, man, that was really cool. What now? Like there's no real like inspiration to move to action. I would even say the call to action is the so what's next, right? Like
Right.
what is that call to action? So kind of leaving them flat with like just telling your story and saying thanks for listening. It's just like no, you have to have a moment of calling them to action. I even think in the hero's journey, right? That you have a hero that meets a guide that has this problem that they're facing, that the guide walks them through, that then he calls them into action, right? Like any good movie that we have and we see the guide hero movement, right? The guide will always call them to action. You have to step into that thing that you're scared of. You have to move forward. And in those brand story videos, you have to move them into some type of action or call them into action in some way, shape, or form. And so those are the four common mistakes that we see in brand story videos.
Can I say
So
something about that before we move on real quick?
yes, please, please, please.
Um, I think when we're thinking through our own video content, much like anything else in life, and I teach this a lot in my coaching, is that you need to begin with the end in mind. So Darren's there talking about the so what or the CTA call to action at
Mhm.
the end of it. That should dictate how the whole rest of the video goes because otherwise you do what Michael Scott says he does in The Office, where he's like, sometimes I just start talking, I don't really even know where I'm going, I just find myself there. You know, you know what I mean? And
Dude,
there's a
and
lot of
that's
videos out there that are like that. They're like, "Man, this
100.
great bass fishing expedition that I went on, let me tell you, I learned all kinds about the best bait to use and all these things. So buy this boat." And you're
Yeah.
like, "What?"
How did
You
huh?
you're talking
Yeah.
about bait. I don't
Man,
need the
what
boat. I need the
dude,
bait.
that's such a good call to all you Office fans out there,
Yeah.
first of all, but second of all, like, that's a reality that we have and kind of sums up all four of the common mistakes, right?
Mhm.
Like, if we're gonna put a big bow on these four common mistakes, it's like, sit down and have a plan. Begin with the end in mind
Right.
and have a plan to not just talk about yourself or not just talk about your credentials or tell too much of your story, but to put a slight outline together and walk down through that. And when you take the time to be intentional like that, you're gonna have a way better video experience, especially in the brand story side of things, than you would if you're just like Dwight or Michael, whoever you said it was that said that, and just start talking. We could have turned this camera on and just started talking about brand story videos from start to finish and just kind of weaved our way there, right? But we said we have a little bit of a plan. We have a little bit of an outline. We say, hey, let's talk about some of the common mistakes.
And
hey,
what do we want to end with?
Yeah.
We thought about what we wanted to end with. We thought,
correct.
what do we want people listening to this episode to take away?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, how do we get there?
Yep.
So you start with the end and then go, how do we get there? And then you bridge it in.
Yeah, that's so
Or
good.
you work it backwards. Start with the end going, hey, I want them to feel empowered to try to create their own brand story video. Okay, what will they need for that? Well, they're going to need to be able to know what to do first. Okay, before that, they're going to need to know what mistakes to avoid. And so you're going to see us kind of following this own framework, even on this episode.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's what's beautiful about it is when you can start to see it. Right. You can start to call it out in other videos or in other places. You go, they didn't do that. They did, and it kind of ruins it for you. But
I know what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. But now I want to walk us through, Dustin, just a simple, 4-step framework that if you took today and implemented it, you would have yourself probably a very successful and good brand story video that you could use on your website, in your social media, or anywhere that you're trying to get folks to engage with you.
I love it.
So I'm just going to walk down through the steps and then we'll break them down individually. But the first step is to start with the problem. We've kind of already talked about that a little bit, but start with the problem. Then we're going to bridge to your journey, which is exactly what we said already. We're going to bridge to your story or your journey. Then you're going to extract the lesson, and then you're going to return to their transformation and call them to action, right? So that's the 4 simple steps. So the first thing we got to do is we got to start with the problem. That is really what it boils down to. When you're starting to talk about your brand story video, what industry are you in? What niche are you in? What problems do most of them face in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah. So the top of this, we talked about a lot of problems, right? We talked about being concise. We talked about knowing what to say. We talked about removing the fluff and how to tell a good story. Those are all problems that stand between you and a great BSV.
Yep. So when you're sitting down to put this together, what problem are you going to step into for your potential clients, right? For us that speak to a lot of coaches and consultants, right? Have you tried to create content and just find yourself frustrated? You don't have enough time in the day. You put some things out there and nobody responds. Like all those things are like, you're going, yes, that's me. When you start with the problem, it brings people in and it allows you to say, I understand who you are and what you're dealing with. Right.
Yep.
And that's a real big part of this framework is to start with that problem, beginning with the challenges, what they're facing, all of that. That is step 1 in this framework. Start with the problem. Any other thoughts or ideas on that?
Nope. I think we defined it pretty clearly.
Pretty straightforward, right? Pretty straightforward. So once you've started with the problem, then you're going to bridge to your journey or your story. We kind of said this a little bit earlier already, but now that you've said, hey, have you struggled with this? Do you, and people are going, yes, that's me. You go, I've struggled with that too at this point in my life, right? So now the problem is bridged to your story. And now you're free to explain that story a little bit. Have you struggled with creating content for your business? It feels like you're on the never-ending grind. Oh my gosh, it's so hard. I was the same way. And so what I decided to do was to put together a framework that would allow me to create more content in less time, right? And now I can explain to you how I did that and what I walked through to be able to do that in my own life. And now you're in it at this point. Mm-hmm. So once you've defined that problem, Now you can bridge it to your story, to your journey, and allow that to unfold a little bit more, right? Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean it's what we talked about in the beginning. I mean, people stories connect emotionally connect people emotionally to the problem that you're trying to solve,
That's
and
it.
no one willingly goes out to solve a problem that they're not emotionally connected to.
Correct. Correct.
Willingly goes out to solve a problem that that they're not emotionally connected to. And so
Yeah.
stories, when we tell a compelling story of our own journey, people begin to see themselves in that. When you go to
Mhm.
the movies and when you watch a movie, a really good movie, you start to see yourself in that, and it
Yeah.
emotionally connects you. That's why we cry
Yeah.
at good movies, and it's because you understand the pain and the journey that
Mhm.
the subject is going through, and so you begin to relate to it, and you go, well, I need to make some changes in my life. That's just a Hollywood movie. That's not even like real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that's the importance of connecting the story, not so that you can say, yeah, I mean, it's great that you can be relatable, but it's
Sure.
so that they can again join you in agreement of, yeah, I've been there. I've been in
Mhm.
that place. My story is not too different
Mhm.
from yours. It's funny
Yeah.
how when we start sharing our stories, how common they really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you share your story in this way, right, attaching it to that problem and sharing that story, it really does connect you with others in really cool ways. And
Yeah.
that's why I love the fact that you said that's why we enjoy movies and TV shows and all of that, because you see it, you connect with it in that strong way because the story is so powerful. And that's why we want to help frame this up for you, because when you do the brand story videos right, you engage people like that. The people go, yes, that's me. Yes, I want to either work with you or connect with you in some way. And that is the power of a brand story video. And so, yeah, so the first thing we'll do is start with the problem. Then we'll bridge to your journey or your story. And then you're going to extract the lesson, right? What did you learn from that part? To use that storyline that I have, that, okay, are you struggling with creating content? Well, okay, I got there, and then I created a framework. I created a framework that helped me create more content in less time. And so that's what I learned in the process of hitting against that struggle, was this reality that I needed to do something about it. This is the thing that I learned. This was the lesson that I learned in that story. Let me bring that to you and inspire you with that, right? To take the whatever lesson that I've learned into your own life. And when you've done that well, like Dustin was saying, when you bring people in and they recognize themselves in your story, and then you teach them the lesson that you learned in that story, now all of a sudden they're like, oh man, this person is an authority. They know what they're talking about. I want to work with them. I want to be friends with them. Like, I want to go hang out with them, like whatever that looks like, right?
Mhm.
And that is what this powerful framework will do for you, is really engage people right where they're at, to make them want to connect and work with you in some way.
Yeah, I think the emphasis of what you're saying there a lot is the word with a lot. I think when people
Mm,
are offered, when they can relate to the struggle that you're on and identify and self identify with that struggle, then they go, okay, well, I can't do this alone.
yep.
So I need something, whether it's a tool or a person to help. And
Yep.
oftentimes it's both. And so being able to say, you're saying, hey, I'm watching this go, and I want to do that with them. I want them to be with me in this process. So there's a lot of with, right? And so offering that
Sure.
solution as a way to say, we can do this together, or you can do this with
Mhm.
this,
Yep.
right? It's an
That's it.
addition to, and people love adding to their tool belt, and that's what we're trying to give them here.
Yeah, yeah. And that sets up our fourth little part of this framework. So once you've started with the problem, you bridge to your journey, your story, and you extract the lesson, then you return to the transformation. This is the piece of, if I could do it, if I can create the framework and work the framework and start to see something happen in my life, you can do it too.
Right.
And now you begin to highlight that reality, that it is possible for you. It is possible for you to win. It is possible for you to overcome the problem that we talked about in the beginning,
Right.
right? And now that becomes part of the inspiration. That becomes part of the coaching or the guide part that we were talking about earlier, right? So now we guide them to the fact that they can do it. And when we lead them there and then call them to action, now the step is to work with us or go out and implement this framework for yourself or whatever that looks like, right? Now we're empowering people to go take on their problems and overcome their problems that they're facing in their business and their life or whatever it is that we're about in our business. And that's what's so cool when you put this framework to work. You can start to see how it's powerful. You get to tell your story, but you also get to engage people and guide them along in their journey. And you can see lives touched and changed in ways that maybe you never thought were possible.
Yeah, for sure. I think ending with the story or reminding them of that story at the end is powerful because it you need I mean, I know we're on a short journey in this BSV of 3 to 6 minutes or so, but at the end or at the beginning it was hey, you have experienced this, I have experienced this, but by the end it's we here's where we have been and where we are going moving forward. And so it's always that like together, like holding hands, walking off into the sunset moment in a movie where you're like, oh, they were struggling separately and now together, you know what I mean? And so and tying that up, getting that emotional tying as being the last thing. That's really what I want to focus on. Having that be the last thing is what will just propel them even further into action. Into the action that you're at, that you just asked them to do, right? The solution, that's the action, right?
For sure.
Go, and just remember, XYZ, this is why we're doing this, call it right back to begin and end with why, not just end, not just begin.
Yeah. I like that, Dustin, how you said you, me, we kind of thing. Like that's where it lands on this story arc. So if you get really good at even that's a mini framework inside of the framework. You've
struggled, I've struggled, we can fix it.
Yep. And together, like we can see things move because I know in my journey I've been able to experience it. I know you can do it in yours. And man, that just works. It just works when you put this thing into motion. And so that's the importance of these brand story videos and really why we say, creating a brand story video is one of the best things that you can do for your business. It sets you apart. It lets people in on the who you are, the what you do, the why you do it. And then it brings them into that story arc. If you utilize this framework in some way, shape, or form, and in fact, one of the next steps that we're going to challenge you with as the listener or the viewer today is this week, grab your phone right here. Grab your phone, grab a camera, walk out and try to put together a 2-minute storyline. If you do what Dustin said first and start with the end in mind, write down some bullet points, walk through this framework, right? Get it written down first. Grab your phone, grab a camera, and just practice telling your story in this framework and see how it becomes more and more engaging. Show it to some friends, show it to some family members. What do you think about this? What stands out? What is missing? If you utilize this framework, though, I promise you, they are going to engage with it and they're going to go, man, I didn't even know that's what you did. I didn't even know that's why you did it. I didn't even know that was what you were about. That's really cool. And you're going to see even those that are close to you begin to engage with you and what you do in some new and cool ways. So that's your challenge today. That's your next step or your action step in all of this is to go out and film that. I will say, if you need some help with that, 1898 Creative would love to work with you in some way, shape, or form. Just reach out to us at info@1898creative.com. We would love to connect with you and help you walk through this, even if it's just kind of being an inspiration in where you're at and what you're doing. If you come up against those problems, please reach out. We would love to walk with you in that. Commercial over. Dustin, Any final thoughts when it comes to this element, this brand story video, something that stands out to you in this story arc?
Yeah, I think for me, thinking through the pressure that a coach or consultant might feel here to get this right the first time, who's to say you can't do 2 or 3 of these until it feels really good?
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you just try shooting a few of them on your phone until you get your
Yeah.
flow right, and then once you get your flow right, reach out to Darren at 1898, and he'll make
Yeah.
it look awesome for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what
Exactly.
that's I just, like, don't feel like the pressure of having to get it right. I just
Yeah.
wanna relieve that because Darren's really good at doing these, and he'll help you walk through it if, uh not if, but because he's good at it and because the with, right? He's gonna help walk through it with you, right? You've experienced it, he's experienced it, so y'all together can get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And I think that ties back nicely with what we were saying earlier about we often don't practice it. We often don't think about our story in this way. We often don't put it to, and I'm even challenged, Dustin, in my own with 1898, even though we do this all the time, to even think through our content even more this way. We do it naturally, right? But now it's like where are we missing the mark? How can we level up on these certain ways? Because it's that powerful, right? When you begin to walk people through in this way, they will engage with your story and be called to action in some way. And that's the beauty of that. So, all right. Well, that's this episode talking about brand story videos, the importance of those. Thanks for taking a few minutes to hang with us today. I hope that this was an inspiration. If you could take just a minute to subscribe. If you're listening to this, go ahead and just subscribe there, or follow, or whatever the button is on that personal wherever you're listening. But if you're on YouTube, always subscribe and connect with us. And that way, it's just a great way of getting this content out in front of more and more people. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us in this journey. And I want you to remember, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, is that you are an artist and that you need to do the hard work of bringing your art out into the world in some way, shape, or form. That's why I have this hat on. That's why I say create your art in most every post that I do, because I truly believe that with all my heart. So go out there, create some brand story videos, create your art, and we'll see you next week.